Welcome back, East Denver. Hope you enjoyed the nice intermission and whatever ads were playing. Next up, we've got Dermot from POKT Network, who's coming to share some nice insights about what's going on in that space and what they've been up to. So everybody, a round of applause. Dermot.
Hey everyone. So my name is Dermot and I'm one of the directors on the POKT Network Foundation, and I'm here today to talk a little bit about growth. But first off, what is POKT Network and what do we have to add to this story? Well, first of all, we've been around a while. POKT launched its mainnet back in July 2020, and 3.5 years later, we've made our fair share of mistakes along the way, but we're still here and we're stronger than ever. And we like to think we've learned a few things along the way too. So in terms of what POKT Network is a DePIN or decentralized physical infrastructure network that coordinates and incentivizes access to any open data source. And we do this via a method known as Remote Procedure Call, or RPC. And essentially, this is a communication protocol for machines. And today, POKT, and it uses this method to enable anyone to essentially talk to a blockchain, so to send a transaction or to query the state. And tomorrow, this same protocol will be able to enable adjacent open data sources as well as even non-blockchain data sources too. And one of the more interesting things about POKT is that we enable this service through a network of over 15,000 nodes distributed across over 22 countries. And despite starting off with close to no growth, similar to many projects, we've evolved over time and developed some interesting strategies that we'd like to talk to you about today. So today we're going to talk about some of the key problems that face pretty much all major crypto networks. We'll introduce the idea of DePIN. What is that? Give you some background, as well as to introduce the growth strategy that we've been pioneering at POKT Network that we feel is dramatically underutilized and is potentially incredibly valuable to the space. And then we'll also talk about a few practical tips and tricks and things to think about if you want to implement this strategy for your own project. So first off, yes, walking the corridors of East Denver or the streets of Denver, you can feel the exuberance and the excitement, but, come on, we're not just there yet. So let's not get too excited, and it's important to realize that we've got a lot to do if we really want to reach that promised land and achieve the global adoption that I think we all believe we can really get to. So here's some of the 3 high-level problems that we see across the space. First off, I don't need to labor this too much, but if you're really going to use a blockchain and go through all that pain, make sure you have a really good use case for it and don't just slap it on for the sake of it. And this slide is quite a nuanced one, but really it's pointing out the fact that while you may not agree with the rules of the game that a centralized platform gives to you, as well as how you interact with it, ultimately it's often very transparent and you know what you're getting. On the other hand, once you get into the funny, uncanny valley of decentralization theater or projects that don't know if they're fully centralized or decentralized, often end users can end up worse off than they would be if the project was fully centralized in the first place. So this is something that builders need to be really thoughtful about when and where they use decentralization in their system. And yeah, I guess this slide speaks to what we want to talk about today and where is all that growth? Despite all the billions of capital, the amazing innovation and talent, we haven't quite seen all that growth just yet, at least on a sustainable basis. And before I go into talk about DePIN and what that is, it's helpful to go back 10 years to 2014 and an incredible article published in the Harvard Business Review that was titled Understanding New Power, written by Jeremy Hamans and Henry Timms. And this essay described how the internet was accelerating a cultural and behavioral shift away from an era of passive consumption to a new age of active participation. And ultimately, this is talking about harnessing the power of the crowd. And the two biggest examples used in this essay were the early rise of Airbnb and Uber as these new networked marketplaces that were leaning into more open and collaborative ways of working to unlock value in ways that simply wasn't achievable before. And 10 years later, in 2024, I think the concept of new power has never been more relevant. However, I think it's now clear to most, at least in this space, that a blockchain is necessary to unlock the true value that new power discusses. And really, this is where DePIN enters the space. So, what is DePIN? If I was to ask 10 different DePIN founders or builders, I would 100% get 10 different answers. And you can look at this sector map and see the many different services that DePINs are looking to tackle and improve. However, the easiest and simplest definition comes from Sal from EV3, which is simply that DePINs are community-powered infrastructure. They harness the power of the crowd to reimagine and improve centralized digital services in ways that simply aren't possible without leveraging a blockchain. So to bring it all back to those three very simple and high-level problems I put at the start of my presentation, when you look at a DePIN project, does a blockchain fix this? And this is a resounding yes. Without a blockchain, it simply isn't possible to achieve the cost and scale benefits that a DePIN can provide. A blockchain-powered protocol can really efficiently and effectively match supply and demand by disintermediating all of that middle layer of middlemen and contracts and KYC, and also handling all those payments to the supply side and from the demand side in a really programmatic and autonomous way. So that achieves major cost and scale benefits, and additionally, a decentralized network is by definition more resilient than a centralized single point of failure that traditional businesses are. And again, this is a much more nuanced question, and clearly we need decentralization to unlock those cost and scale benefits enabled by a blockchain in terms of the on-chain settlement and the resilience factors, as well as arguably ownership. However, when it comes to crowdsourced CapEx, clearly Airbnb and Uber and other major platforms in Web 2 have achieved major scale by tapping into the crowd. So clearly they've done this through availing of pools of private and public capital. I think it's arguable that using a blockchain and token incentives, we can do this more efficiently and effectively, but this remains an open question on how to do this best. And additionally, on the innovation front, I think many here would argue that token-powered open source ecosystems can actually combine intrinsic and extrinsic incentives in a really unique and powerful way. However, there are very many powerful and productive open source communities already, and I think we've got a lot to learn from them in this space too. And again, problem number 3. So have DePINs solved, have a golden solution to where all the growth is? Clearly, the answer is not yet. Despite all the talent and funding and building to date, the levels of revenue and impact doesn't hit the mark for where we all want to be as a space. Yeah, at least. So all of this preamble is to really get to the point where we are at DePIN, and we're here climbing the hill, staring at a big climb ahead of us and a big chasm to jump across. And it's no surprise that there is so much problems with achieving the growth and getting to mainstream adoption when you think about all the problems that a DePIN project has to get through. You have to build out the protocol and the tooling, coordinate and onboard a supply side, enable a community that's productive and impactful, You need to avail of the capital to build out your project and likely to overcome the cold start problem to build up and bootstrap your supply side. And then you need to be super thoughtful about who the stakeholders are in your protocol and how they should be represented and ultimately have some governance and representation. And then demand is multifaceted, right? You need world-class BD, super targeted and thoughtful marketing, fantastic customer support, and most end users need much more than a basic service. They often typically need value-added features too. And if you're not moving and adapting, you're going to die. So standing still is not an option. You ultimately need to move quickly and evolve as a project. And this leads into the first innovation and common, I guess, solution to much of the growth problems we see across the DePIN space, and that is the realization that decentralization by itself does not sell. You need to abstract away that painful UX layer of dealing with the protocol to make it much easier for people to interact with it. And gateways are typically centralized interfaces, often built by the core team, that abstract away the protocol and make it much more easy to interact with. And so you can think about gateways from an end user perspective as a way to get a trad SaaS-like experience. So you can avail of account management, potentially value-added features, tailored customer support, and all of the things that you'd expect if you were to use a Web 2-like competitor. So this is, again, helping DePIN projects achieve parity with their centralized competitors. And I guess to many, particularly in this space, the idea of using any kind of centralization is almost seen as an absolute no. However, as I discussed a few slides before about the benefits of DePINs in terms of the cost, the scale, the resilience, and even the ownership, that's all really enabled by the core decentralized blockchain and protocol layer. However, when you get to the end user interfaces, actually the need to move quicker, the operational efficiency and speed often overcome the benefits you get from decentralization. So it's important to not think this is all a one-size-fits-all approach. And this is where the DePIN Mullet comes in. And for us, I guess, the way we think about the DePIN Mullet is this is sort of like a have your cake and eat it approach. So often there's that tension between centralization and decentralization, and often the question of whether you can have a token or an equity business. And actually, thanks to an incentivized blockchain protocol, we can actually separate out these concerns. And actually, we can enable token and equity business models to run in parallel without causing any unmanageable conflicts or even any unsustainable overheads. And I guess the foundations of the DePIN Mullet come from the three principles of pragmatism, minimalism, and coopetition. So the pragmatic ideal is that decentralization does not sell, so you need a convenience layer. Once you realize that, the principle of minimalism comes into place, which is that focus or a lack of focus is often the death of most businesses. So if you really want to achieve the best results, you should not try to do everything yourself. And that leads to the understanding that you need to partner and bring in others to bring in all the benefits that gateways can provide. However, and this is where most DePIN projects are today, with one or two gateways in your ecosystem, actually you've created other single points of failure. And actually you're failing to achieve the true levels of innovation that competition on a dynamic ecosystem can enable. And so this is the coopetition ideal, where if you can foster a dynamic culture of collaboration while also putting in the right economic incentives and opportunities for a really competitive ecosystem on the demand layer, you can bring all these benefits. And additional benefits, if you're successful in achieving this, come from so much less redundancy in the ecosystem. Instead of every single new storage, RPC, or bandwidth project having to build out the same back-end infrastructure and also coordinate and incentivize the same supply side infrastructure or bring that in-house, you can actually build on that same base layer infrastructure. So this lowers startup costs, meaning that you need to charge less margin and ideally need less profits or revenue to get to profitability. So this is incredible for entrepreneurialism and ultimately growing out these markets. And once you have teams that can focus on their end users, they can look to innovate on providing value-added features, move a lot quicker, and adapt to the needs of their local markets and regions. So this all sounds well and good. However, to really achieve and adopt the DePIN Mullet, you need to sort out some things in the back or the decentralized protocol end first. And really, like everything, it starts with your culture, your mission, your vision, your values. And because no matter what your technology or your code may say, the social contract is the layer zero. And if you're going to be able to convince businesses to offload some or all of their back-end infrastructure to your protocol, they're going to need to feel welcome. They're going to need to feel like they can trust you, and why. And part of this comes from how you think about representing these stakeholders in your ecosystem. Will their voice be heard? Does it have weight? And the more likely this is the case, the less likely they are to exit. And this is actually one of the strongest moats in open source and blockchain today. And lastly, if you can really succeed in enabling that culture of collaboration, this can compound over time and achieve incredible benefits that I think is what we all want to see from the communities that we're building and are participating in. So again, this is pretty much what it says on the tin. I think we're all excited by the amazing blank canvas that the crypto world brings for these incredible crypto economic experiments. However, while you may speak to someone who perhaps is a degen in the streets, if they build a business of any kind of scale, they're going to have someone on their team who is a neat freak in the spreadsheets. So if you really want to bring these businesses onto your platform and to use your protocol, they're going to need some clarity around your costs, how predictable this is, and have incredible user experience and transparency around the risks involved for them to build on your protocol. And again, this is pretty straightforward stuff, but it's really important not to overpromise and overdeliver. You can help people test on your protocol, prime them about the benefits of building on your protocol. However, it's important not to overstate the benefits of working with you, and think about that timing. It doesn't need to be perfect, but it does need to be good enough. And the key dimensions here are typically reliability and performance, but ultimately it also needs to be super easy to integrate and maintain this gateway integration and adapt it to their needs too. So to bring this all together, if you are able to bring in more gateways into your ecosystem, this can not only enable more collaboration on your base layer, so feeding back into your protocol to drive better quality of service and reliability, this can also bring more demand. With more protocol revenue, this can incentivize more suppliers to join your network, raising the standards for everyone, and again, feeding into that flywheel and driving more and higher, better quality of service and reliability for everyone. So to close off, the DePIN Mullet is a synergistic mechanism that leans into all available business models for an ecosystem without creating unmanageable conflicts or an unsustainable overhead. And it's built on the foundations of the three principles of pragmatism. Decentralization does not sell. It's convenience that expands markets. Minimalism, knowing that if you try to do everything yourself, you're very unlikely to succeed. And whatever you do succeed in is unlikely to be that good in the first place. And lastly, the true success comes from being able to foster that healthy and dynamic collaboration and competition dynamic at your demand layer. Thank you all, and look forward to taking any questions if you have any time.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, since you mentioned that not everything needed to be a blockchain, and the mullet was specifying that, you know, in the back you will have this decentralized physical infrastructure, but at the front you're going to have sort of a centralized experience. But in the last wheel, you present that maybe you will need more gateways. You mean a decentralized system of gateways, or a gateway that comes from the community? Like, what exactly did you mean by that?
Yeah, so I guess more gateways, I mean more businesses building on your protocol. And so today, if you look at most decentralized infrastructure protocols, they typically have an option to connect directly to the protocol, and that was the initial thinking with most of these storage bandwidth protocols, that if you really want access to this decentralized service, you would connect directly. However, nobody really wants that. So almost every protocol has built one gateway. However, the thesis of this gateway ecosystem and the DePIN Mullet is that you need to foster many, like tens if not hundreds of these businesses to build on top. And so they may look like a 1 or 2 person team. And I guess in POKT's case, today we have 3 gateways. So they are 3 different RPC businesses. However, of the next 3 we're planning to onboard, 1 is an existing RPC business, but the next 2 are actually major developer communities that currently don't run any RPC, realize they have a really strong brand and ultimately a distribution channel they can tap into. So actually by building an RPC business on top of the protocol, we provide the infrastructure, and they can provide essentially the network and the sales process. Does that answer your question?
Round of applause for Dermot, everybody. Thank you. We'll jump back right into a quick